Part of the Superfund research program here. And it's my honor to introduce our second speaker of the day, which is Dr. Nick Procopio. He works for the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection for the last 4 years. And one of his main hats he wears is overseeing the New Jersey Private Well Testing Act, which is what he's going to speak about today.
All right, well, I want to thank Steve first for the invitation to come speak with you all, and Stuart Bregman for coming back up and listening to my talk yet again. I know you've heard this a number of times. I appreciate the support. And then thanks to everybody else for coming out to listen. So what I want to do this afternoon is give you an idea of what we do in New Jersey to try and manage private wells throughout the state. So we'll go right into private wells is sort of the context and points that I want to hit on. Why do we care about private wells? We've got a great introduction from the previous speaker about why to care about private well water. What have we learned from the Private Well Testing Act about overall groundwater quality throughout New Jersey? And are there regions in the state with specific groundwater problems? And then lastly, if you're a homeowner, that we've been using all of this great data that we've collected, what do you do? So what kind of information and outreach do we do with homeowners? Okay, so sort of this, why do we care? New Jersey's population is about 8.9 million people based on the 2015 estimate. So about 87% of the 8.9 million people obtain their water from highly regulated public water systems. So that says about 13% of the population gets their water from their backyard, so private wells. So you say, okay, 13% of the state, that's not that much. Is it really a big issue? Well, in New Jersey, when you have 13% of your population, total about 1.15 million people, it's a big deal. It's not just a few people that are falling through the cracks in our own public water. So it's a large portion of our population, whether it's in actual percentage or just a raw number of people.
How does it compare to other states, neighboring states?
For neighboring states, just because of the population density, it's hard. So other states might have a higher percentage of folks own private well, but the numeric, the number of people who's well. So we get it just by sheer volume. So using that 1.15 million people and average home size, we deduce that there's about 400,000 private wells in the state. There hasn't been a census of private wells in about, I think it's the 1990 census was the last time that it was a census survey question. So we're working off a lot of local and temporal estimates. So there's no federal regulations covering private wells. And before 2002, in the state of New Jersey, at least, state regulations applied only to newly constructed wells. So if you're building a new home or sinking a new well to replace an old well, there were regulations. And the regulations for the newly constructed wells mimic much of what we have in the Private Well Testing Act. So, a lot of these, or a bit from these next couple of slides, for those of you in public health, I'm sure won't be too much of a surprise. But I'll go through them just to hit the highlights. There's naturally occurring substances in the ground that can make you sick. And taste and smell, taste, odor, smell, they're really what triggers people's attention, right? It's not the things that you can't see, that you can't taste, but are there. So that's sort of why the emphasis for the Private Well Testing Act. Not only might you be contaminated by natural sources from the rocks and the geology and so on, but there can be other non-point source, point source pollution that gets into the groundwater, migrates, and can potentially affect your wells. So, health concerns vary depending on the chemical, as well as the length of exposure, but a list of some of the potential health concerns include anything basically that you're feeling can be related back to your drinking water one way or another. But anything from exposure to just total coliform or E. coli bacteria, mercury, we sample for 26 different volatile organic compounds, lead, arsenic, uranium, radium. We don't test for uranium at this point, but I'll talk more about that, and radium. So it ranges from an upset stomach all the way up to cancer. So it's a big issue. So the act itself was initiated by legislature in 2001. It became effective in September of 2002. It pertains to all real estate transactions within the state and rental properties every 5 years, regardless if there's a turnover of the tenant or not. So rental properties every 5 years. If it's a new tenant, the new tenant is then supplied with the result from the previous test. Rentals don't require a new tenant, but every 5 years. But any real estate transaction of a home does. And so the homeowner, or I should say the seller and the buyer, they can negotiate the price of the test, but they both get the results. So they're both privy to the results. Test is running anywhere from $450 to $600, plus or minus. Labs vary, and we'll talk about parameters that are included in the test, but they vary depending on what part of the state you're in. For example, quickly, arsenic is required in the northern part of the state, but not the southern part of the state. And that's more or less because of where the initiation of the act because of geology. But more to that as we move on. So results are provided to both the client as well as submitted to the state. So the client in that case is the potential buyer and the seller. So both parties get it. And I think a really important point to note is this last bullet. There's no action that's required. It's a right to know act. So the homeowner, the purchaser knows what they're getting into. And the homeowner, the seller, might then understand why a transaction might fall through.
So these are the county decisions. These county level decisions.
To follow up?
Yeah.
No.
No. The testing act, at least you said that. What do you mean by county dependent?
So the parameters that are tested, that are required, are county dependent.
And for arsenic is
just in the northern 9 counties.
Okay.
Okay, I'll show you a map.
No, sure.
I will. Let me show you. Get to that point. I'll show you. So here are the primary parameters that are measured. So arsenic in the northern, 12 counties, mainly because of geology, and there's a geologic shift basically in north and south under the fault line. Mercury required in the 9 southern counties. Again, primarily those 9 counties selected because of persistence of mercury in the groundwater is most often found in the southern part of the state, but it certainly doesn't mean we wouldn't find it in the northern part of the state. So I'll show you a slide as we move further along that looks into what we can do to improve the act. So it's 14 years old. There's always opportunities to improve legislation as we grow and as we learn. So inorganics, arsenic, mercury, nitrates, lead, radiologicals, we look at gross alpha in the 12 southern counties, 12 so it's the 9 southernmost and 3 in the neck of New Jersey, those counties, and they'll be on that. And gross alpha here is meant to be a proxy or a surrogate measure for radium. Okay, so it gets real confusing when you get into the northern part of the state, and this is perhaps one reason that they left. They kept radium only in the southern part of the state. It's because when you get into the northern part of the state, there's also uranium. Radium start to really confuse it doesn't confuse the gross alpha test. It complicates how do you treat and how do you decipher the results. And then we have some secondary standards of iron, manganese, and pH that are required. Okay, so we'll look at the limitations of the private well testing act database. So I said all of these, so since 2002, the data has been collected by the Department of Environmental Protection, stored in a database, and then so we have access to all of that home by home information. So it's a large database. I'll talk more about how big, but so some of the limitations, just to be forefront with it, we're sampling untreated water, and some of that untreated water, the way the act is written, can be collected from holding or pressure tanks. So not, say, the raw groundwater itself. So there's a lag, there's a holding time. Sometimes the plumbing fixtures associated with the pressure in the holding tank can, it's the right word, not so much tamper the results, but complicate or confuse the results.
On the other hand, that's what people drink.
Except sometimes the access to the holding tank and the pressure tank have, say the fixture isn't used very often. One of the parameters we test for is lead, and there's still some high nickel content in those fixtures, and so if they're not flushed properly, so there's some complications sometimes with where the samples are taken. We don't have detailed hydrogeological information, maybe except the pH, for every single well. While it exists, it had to be collected at some point when the well was constructed, or at least the more modern wells anyway. We don't have these databases tied together, and that's a drawback, and that's something that we would really, really like to do in the future. So when we are looking at test results, we don't know if it's a shallow well or a deep well, if it's an old well or a new well. So that is a limitation. Lab capacity, for example, gross alpha, was phased in over time because we were afraid that labs didn't have the capabilities at the time to start taking all of these samples in to do a 48-hour gross alpha test. So we phased it in so the labs could build capacity. It's a regulation. It's hard to pass. There was always some compromise, some give and take in the state, while we still try to better the act as we move along. And then the last one, water treatment in the state is completely unregulated. So even if you have your results and you see that, for example, your arsenic is high or your gross alpha is high, where's your next step? Your next step really isn't with the state to tell you which of the treatment facilities or treatment companies to work with because they're independently owned and we don't favor one over the other, and there's no regulations. So a homeowner is left, in some cases, up to the whim of these treatment companies in the honesty of those. So we take that for what it's worth. Some of the strengths, though. It's an extremely large database, 35 independent labs. 21 of those labs are still currently active over the 16 years of the Act. September through March of 2014, I'm using March of 2014 as our quality assured, quality checked data set that we're working with for our current results. So we have 106,000 samples. That's 106,000 homes that have been sampled. Some of those homes have been sampled multiple times, multiple real estate transactions over the 16-year time period. So we're looking at, to our best count, 86,767 unique wells that are being tested. And that accounts for about 22% of our 400,000 or so wells. So even after 16 years of this mandatory testing, we're still only about a quarter of homes. Okay. Yes?
Could you tell how many of these tests are from the rental, the 5-year rental requirement versus the sale?
We don't know that. That's not one of the pieces of information that comes back. Right. So they're required every 5 years, and we could maybe query through the data and see how often some of the properties are coming back. But it's even then we're maybe at most three or four times. But there's not a checkbox that they click that says this is a rental, because part of the time it might be a rental, part of the time it might be a primary residence.
But there shouldn't be anyone missing. So if all of those have been tested, you have the data. So
Of the 86,000 wells that we know that we have marked as unique wells, they've been tested. It only represents a small handful of the 400,000 private wells we estimate to be in the state.
So I'm saying that the remaining, we'll assume that probably haven't been tested.
Correct. That's a fair assumption. Have they been?
If they were tested, you should have helped them.
Well, if they were tested outside, so if you bought your house in 1999 and you haven't sold it yet,
sure, you
would not be in this database. But maybe you know to test your water. And so maybe in the last 5 years you've tested, it would not wind up in here because we're only collecting data that are collected as part of the Private Well Testing Act requirement. So if you're a good homeowner and you're testing your well every year, every 5 years for different parameters, it's not, those results aren't showing up there. Okay?
But the estimates of
what fraction of homes people test is not high.
Right, and we know that from some of our intervention and outreach surveys that we've done, there's not a high incidence of testing on your own without the poking and prodding of others. Good. So the well locations are accurate and reasonable, or they're corrected and reasonably accurate. What that means is this is a quick snapshot of what we started out with early on. So all those green dots represent the location of a well that was sampled in New Jersey. And if you know your geography fairly well, there's a lot of green dots that aren't even in the state. Okay, so.
Somewhere in the ocean.
Yeah, somewhere in the ocean. If I zoomed out further, you'd see somewhere in upstate New York, somewhere on the other side of the country even. And so it's bad. So the data itself, I want to make sure I make this point. The data itself about the parameters, concentrations for each of the parameters, they're coming in from state certified laboratories. The X and Y data don't go through any QA QC from the labs. They're required to take take an XY measurement, a latitude and longitude, and then submit it along with their test results. So it gets this uncorrected number that looks like these into our database. We know just by mapping these X and Y's that there's some issues. So we've taken upon ourselves every one of these records. We make sure that they're within our criteria, 75 feet. We get the X and Y coordinates, we get an address, a street address, as well as the block and lot for each of the homes. And so our first screening is the XY location within 75 feet of the stated block and lot. If so, we leave it alone. If not, then we go and diagnose. And there's a number of different reasons. Maybe they reversed X and Y. That happens a lot, and they key it in, and that's why you wind up in the wrong hemisphere.
But if you have address, then MS is a better thing to use than this X and Y.
No, because sometimes, and I think I have it down here, we'll have Maple Road versus Maple Drive, and in some towns you could have a Maple Road and a Maple Drive. But block and lots, for the most part, don't change, but they do in some places. Every once in a while, a town will come through and they'll totally mess with our database, and they'll change their block and lot, their numbering scheme, and so that gets difficult. Sometimes there's just data entry errors that we can find quickly. So, I say the road address might be better, might not be better. In some cases, it goes back and forth to try and highlight which one is sort of more usable.
Spelling is important.
Yes, right.
But this is not bad. It's less than 1,000 points. It's less than 1% off. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's
early math.
in a large data. That's why I said this. It's one of the perks of the data, because even if there are a lot that you can't explain, if you were to remove those, you still have a very robust data set to work with.
So all the state certified labs are required to submit their data to
Yes,
DEP?
if they're contracted by the homeowner or the seller as part of the New Jersey Private Well Testing Act, they won't have to be a certified lab, meaning that our Office of Quality Assurance basically certifies them. They go out to the lab, they make sure they have the capabilities, their certifications are current and everything like that. So yeah, and then as part of the requirement to participate, they have to submit the data into a database portal that we've generated for them.
What about quality control of the labs?
So they're audited every year, the labs are. There's always the question, could they type in a data point wrong into the database? That's certainly a possibility. We've seen pH measurements that are over 14. So what does that mean? Is it a keying error? 70 as a pH value. Does that really mean 7.0? Those types of things we eliminate. We can't go back to it. Sometimes we can call the lab and check for certain parameters, and sometimes the labs are willing to go back through old records, and they do. So in certain circumstances, we'll make the effort to to really dive deep and go back with the labs. But their part of their certification is to data archive. Okay, a little bit more humor there. So just to start showing you distribution, so part of what I wanted to bring to this discussion was, what is the Private Well Testing Act? How is it run in the state? How robust is this data set that we have? But also, what do we do with it? How do we translate this wealth of information back out to the public? Well, part of that is doing things like this and letting practitioners know what data is available. So making a series of apps like this was our first step out. And this one here is just to show these are the top 10 most frequently sampled towns. I don't expect anybody to know all of these towns or even the counties, but just to show that there's a range. So West Milford and Franklin Township, 2,000 samples over this time period, goes to show that there are certain towns that have a lot of private wells and some towns that don't. For example, if you look at it's all over the same period in Hudson County, New Jersey, which is just on the other side of the river, 4 well samples. And we're still surprised that we even have 4 in Hudson County. So there are a couple people that are holdouts and don't want to be hooked up to, even in Hudson County, don't want to be hooked up to public water. But certainly Sussex, Hunterdon County, Morris County, these are more of our rural counties and have certainly more frequent real estate transactions with private wells. Okay, so just to give you a sort of temporal peek at what's happened. So just keep in mind that first bar is 2002. The Act went online in September 2002, so there's so few results. And we're about halfway through the number of wells tested in 2016. You see this nice little drop off. Remember, this is all tied to real estate transactions, so if you need a market indicator, we have one of those too. Okay, what have we learned from PWTA about overall groundwater quality in New Jersey? One thing I like to point out is, although the Act is specific to New Jersey, a lot of the parameters that we are analyzing are not New Jersey specific. A lot of them are related to the geology, to the natural landscape. And so we shouldn't just expect what we see in New Jersey to stay within New Jersey's boundaries. So, for example, this sort of lighter brownish area reaching through New Jersey, that's New Jersey's Piedmont area. No reason we shouldn't see some similar results in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and same with what's in the coastal plain. Some parameters might be more specific to the coastal plain area. And so up through Connecticut, Long Island, coastal Maryland, Delaware, it would not be a surprise to see some of the same characteristics through those parts of it. So it's not just New Jersey centric, or at least the lessons aren't New Jersey centric. So what do the data do for us? It lends to this development of vulnerability maps and vulnerability assessments. Can we target areas that need potentially more intervention? Are we seeing trends, spatial trends, that we should look more deeply into? Hotspot analysis. As a GIS person, we look for hotspots. And so we can identify those. But it also helps us inform and direct our public outreach efforts. So we collect a heck of a lot of data. What do we do with it? Well, the best thing we found to do with it is team up with the folks here at Columbia, and Stuart and Steve have been great at boosting our outreach. Okay. And then lastly, from the perspective of state employees, we can certainly recommend after homeowners come up high with certain parameters that they install treatments or get in touch with other treatment companies and figure out exactly what to do. But what we really can do is urge this test. We can't say that enough. Homeowners have to test. And we hear all kinds of reasons why homeowners don't test. Very few of them make sense.
Who pays for it, seller or buyer?
They can negotiate that. You can split it. Often, anecdotally, what we hear is that the buyer wants the seller to pay for it. And that's something that's on the closing document, so we don't really ever find that out. But it can be split. I don't know. The best answer is anecdotally is mostly on the seller, but if a buyer wants a property enough. So regional data analysis. So how do we break down the data on a statewide basis? First of all, is really, really important to me, is in the Act, it specifically states that all outreach and analyses have to be maintained confidential. So that limits what we can do with it. We can't call up specific homeowners and say, oh, by the way, it looks like your test results are high in certain parameters. Although the county health organizations are also given the information. And there is, in the Act, they can do intervention after results. The county health organizations can get involved with a may clause in the Act. They may. They may, they may not, up to 200 feet of your neighbors. And so if you're in a rural area or a private well, there probably aren't many neighbors within 200 feet. It's a small radius to start looking for.
You can reinforce the message.
Right, to the homeowner as well as neighbors within 200 feet of that property. And 200 feet, again, is not real large. So we have to maintain confidentiality. How do we maintain confidentiality? We have to look at things on some regional scale. So oftentimes that regional scale has been, you look at things on a county-wide level. In New Jersey, there's 21 counties over a large state. It helps to break up the geography a little bit, but it doesn't hone in on specific trouble spots. You can look at municipalities in the same. It's nice to be able to summarize issues within a town or in a county, but they're not localized at that point either, especially in some of the larger municipalities. So in an effort with the CDC, the environmental, EPHT, environmental health tracking, environmental, it'll come to me at some point. Well, so in some of the efforts in the projects we've had with them, we were working on a way of breaking down the data to a smaller unit outside of the county, outside of the municipality. And we came to whether it would be 1 mile by 1 mile. We settled on 2 mile by 2 mile. We went through a number of different grid sizes. 1 was too small, 5 was too big, but 2 seemed really, really useful. So we wanted to also get away from this idea of political boundaries. Let's not talk about a town or a county. Let's talk about a spot. So in order to help maintain this confidentiality, we decided that a minimum of 10 wells per grid was necessary to have been tested to show any type of results for it. Some would say, or we've heard that, 2 is enough if you're in a 2 mile by 2 mile grid. But all the talking heads decided that 10 was where we would stick. But that works for us. So 2 mile by 2 mile grid covers or allows us to retain 98% of the data for analysis. In other words, only 2% of the 100 and some thousand samples are left out because they're in grids of less than of 10 or fewer wells. Okay. So when it comes to the different parameters and exceedance of...
You have a question from someone on the web. Oops. Was there? I lost it.
The population.
Yeah.
What's the smallest population size of the census?
Where'd it go? Yeah.
Oh, I don't know that.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay, so we're looking here at percent of wells tested that exceed specific MCLs in New Jersey. And so by far, gross alpha, which again, tested in the southern part of the state, is primarily radium, and arsenic are our 2 parameters of most concern because of the rate of exceedance. So arsenic, of those 86,000 wells that are sampled, about 8.9% of them exceed New Jersey state standard, which is 5 micrograms per liter. We're lower, half the federal standard, and about 10.1% exceed the gross alpha 15 cubic per liter standard for gross alpha. and then some of the other related to human activity or anthropogenic parameters, nitrates, PECO, coliform, VOCs, mercury, are much lower compared to some of these natural contaminants.
And if you use the EPA MCL for arsenic, what?
Right there. So statewide, if we use the federal 10 microgram per liter, 3% of the wells exceed. Okay. Compared to our 8.9. Okay. So let me just make sure I don't miss anything. So arsenic, I want to talk a little bit about arsenic because I know Columbia has an interest in arsenic with the Superfund project, but so we've done a lot of summarization with the arsenic data, so this might be of interest to you. So some sources, arsenical pesticides. Everybody that talks to me about this says, okay, well, it's not the historic pesticide use that's the problem in New Jersey. As it's not likely sourced, it's not movable, and so on and so forth. Okay, I'll buy that for a little bit. But natural minerals, pyrite-rich formations, glauconite clays, the natural geology is really what's driving the issues in New Jersey. I buy that. Okay. Except in the coastal plain, which is the southern part of the state, we still do see exceedances of arsenic. And if you don't have those geologic formations in that part of the state, what is it? It's probably historic use of pesticides. New Jersey is the Garden State, right? Especially that southern portion of the state, the coastal plain, lots of orchards, lots of pesticides. So you'll see as we move along, we still think that arsenic should be a parameter that's required for analysis in the whole state. What's interesting to highlight here is just in the Piedmont region. If there is a location in New Jersey that's really, from a geographic perspective, it's the Piedmont. It really jumps out. 17% of all the homes tested exceed our standard. About 6% pass don't pass the federal standard. Okay. And so I want to just introduce, looking at it from this geographic perspective by municipality. And we're trying to get away from this, so we like to think in townships and municipalities, so I'll show it. This is the number of wells tested, so there are certain pockets of the state based on just geography and connectedness to the public water system where private wells are more abundant, and this is just showing the number of wells tested. Again, so we're going to flip back and forth. That's the municipalities, large, and then if we break this down, you can see the town lines are in black underneath those, or on top of those grids. So you can see there are spots within the towns, in some of those towns, where arsenic is high, and other areas where arsenic is low. So just deeming a town as either arsenic rich or arsenic poor isn't necessarily fair to intervention. And so we're going to sort of focus on this area down here as we highlight through some of these next few slides. So this is looking at the municipalities. This is the percentage of wells within each one of these towns that exceed the New Jersey standard of 5 micrograms per liter. And so color coded on the bottom here, in 10% intervals or so for this map. So the darker the blue, basically, the higher the concentration. And then if we look at on a 2 mile by 2 mile grid basis, the highest the highest rates of exceedance are in this little red bubble here. And I guess one thing I made the point, just so the numbers sort of play out, 86,000 wells is what we're looking at statewide. The northern part of the state, about 35,000 wells, if you're looking at details on the maps, 35,000 wells have been tested for arsenic, just required in those upper counties. So here's, this is looking at arsenic exceeding 5 micrograms per liter. And then this map here is keeping the scale the same at the 10 microgram per liter standard. So just flipping back and forth, I went back to 5. This is at 10. Scale is the same. And then I did this just to highlight some of the higher. So this is now looking at 10 microgram exceedance, the federal standard, but then color ramp is truncated a little bit to really emphasize some of those higher ones. Okay, and so they really do stand out. There is a portion of the state where the geology is greatly influencing high levels of arsenic. it's cut off a little bit at the top, but this is looking at the 95th percentile of arsenic within, of wells within each of those grids where there's at least 10 or more to sample from. And so the highest range I'm looking at is greater than 10 to 45 micrograms per liter. That 45 is the 95th percentile. That's our upper limit of the 95th percentile. If I remember right, our highest value that we have to date in the private well testing is 254 micrograms. Colleagues of mine at the DEP, Steve Spade, has done a lot of arsenic work in homes outside of private well testing. So he's seen a lot more data from homes with values higher than that, and worked with homeowners who are quite pleased with the quality of their water, even though it's quite high. So again, that intervention sometimes gets difficult with homeowners that have lived in a residence for a while. They drink the water for years. They don't taste it. They don't smell it. There's not an issue. Okay. So we did look at an attempt, still working through the results here and the diagnosis of this. We took the 2 mile by 2 mile grids and randomly selected one well within each one of those grids to try and get a stratified or a randomly stratified design of wells for correlation and analysis with the geology. Can we say something about the geology firsthand? And so we did selectively pick, these are just some spatial statistics, and what we're looking at the bottom here, this number here,
You have to use the mouse.
there you go. The 0.014 is not significant, which is good in this case. So they're not, they're random, there's no bias to them. So that's good. So each one of those points were used and then related to the geology. What's the geology underneath that point? And again, with the caveat and the limitation that we don't know how deep that well is. We don't know exactly what aquifer bearing unit the well is tapping into, but just looking at the proximate relationship with the geology. And here what we're looking at is percent of the wells within each one of these geologic units that exceed 5 or exceed 10. And there's a few that match what we expected. These mudstone, siltstone shales, Triassic age, Jurassic age rocks that seem to have higher prevalence of so it basically reinforces the point that we've been saying, that it's tied to the geology. Okay. So I mentioned also gross alpha as one of the other natural parameters that exceeds throughout the state. That was about 10.1% of our wells exceeded. So here we're just showing a map of those same grids, but also just notice we're not looking at the entire state, just southern counties where we assume that radium is the primary driving force of the gross alpha activity. And there's a lot of more activity in the southern part of the state can be related to some of the geology as well. Okay. So if we were to make some recommendations, and we've made these recommendations to the folks in the department that drive changing rules, so from the scientific perspective to the rulemakers, these are our recommendations. We would say we want to expand radiologic testing all the way up north. So we're just doing it currently in these blue counties, or the blue and the green get gross alpha. We would suggest that we open up those orange counties to gross alpha testing, but also add uranium into those counties as well. Uranium right now is not tested, but audited so that you can decipher whether you need to test for or treat for radium or uranium, which could be commingled in the northern part of the state. We would also argue to test for arsenic in the southern part of the state where it's not currently. There are still exceedances. If the point of this is to protect public health, and certainly we would suggest expansion to the south as well.
Do you have geological reasons?
Yeah, actually we do. There are a number of studies that even predate the initiation of the Act by USGS throughout New Jersey, where the, I think I'll have them now, but there's a couple of aquifer outcrops from the Potomac Raritan Magothy Aquifer, where arsenic is high, naturally occurring. It doesn't seem to be tied to pesticide use, but these pockets of geology. So, and there are still private wells in those outcrops. So there are, we think, some reasons for natural exposure as well as the spot occurrence of residual pesticides. Okay, so the next few slides go pretty quick. I see that, but so just to show you some of the geographic distribution of the parameters that we test for. Color scheme is always the same. Yellow is low occurrence, darker the blue, the higher percentage. So I guess I should make that clear too. As we're looking at these maps, what we're looking at is the percent of wells in each one of these grids that exceed either a primary or a secondary MCL. We're not looking at actual concentrations, mainly because that gets difficult with so many of them below detection level. And so what's the best way to show medians or averages or percentiles when 2/3 or so of your data is below detection? So looking at percent exceedances seems to work well in test. The public understands that.
Why so the North has the shirt without the R? Why is there this?
With the total coliform?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've looked closely at this, and actually, we had I should plug our microbiologist, Tom Apterhold, who's just since retired, who's gone through we might be on our 4th paper, where he's sort of broken this down, looked at repeat sampling. So the more often that a home is tested, coliform comes up. It's seasonal, it seems. That depending on what time of year you sample, the home transaction goes through, can click a coliform response. Precipitation preceding the event. None of that gets you to what you just asked about the north versus the south. Well, there's a difference between the northern geology and southern geology, where basically the bottom half from the neck down is a big sandbox, and water filtrates very nicely through that. So we figure the coliform is getting picked up, it's adhering to the sand grain, where in the north, it's a lot of fractured rock, and it's going right through the fissures and the cracks, and it's going right through. Yeah. So that's our best explanation, and I think that generally makes sense. So this slide is in here. So I should also mention too, total coliform homeowners are required to be total coliform. If there's a presence of total coliform, then the homeowner is required to test for fecal or E. coli. They have the choice, or the lab makes the choice for the homeowner. So what we're showing here is just if a home is in the north, so this is the bedrock region, the northern part of the state, just frequency of repeat sampling. So homes that are tested twice for total coliform in the red, that's the bedrock. So you see more often than not, you have exceedances. So if you look 3 times, you go back 4 times, you're going to, you test enough. I think our statistician came up with it. If you test 6 times, you're almost guaranteed one of those 6 is going to have total coliform.
Shit happens.
Well, especially when you make the association, you say maybe the obvious is that most of these wells that are on private well also have a septic system. And oftentimes, they're not that far apart. But you see that it's not as frequent in the south, even for the repeat sampling. We think that has a lot to do with the sandbox that is the south.
So the scales of those two are different? It's hard for me to see.
Yes, they are. This one goes up to 50, and this is for total coliform, and fecal coliform E. coli is at the bottom. And so that only goes up to 12%. And so this is same scales again, looking at fecal coliform throughout the state. I should say the color ramp is the same. The scales differ for the range of values. We are looking at, it gets cut off.
It's showing online, percentage of wells exceeding 10.
Oh, this is for nitrate. Okay. Thank you. I should have picked that up. So we had the coliform, we had fecal coliform, then we have nitrate, and there's a lot of similar patterns with those as well. When we look at some of the nitrate with the coastal plain, we see some of our greatest exceedances of nitrate in the south, which, especially in this area down here, is still our highest agriculturally productive area. So whether it's from fertilizer and such. That's probably the biggest driver of nitrate concentrations.
And another compounding factor may be that in the Northwest, where you have your high arsenic and you're presumably anoxic water, so you have denitrification.
Sure, that's possibly with nitrate. Okay, so iron, and then you'll see manganese will fly in as well. And so this here is where I wanted to point out this continuous sort of stretch or reach of iron and also manganese sort of in the same area. That's that outcrop of that 1 aquifer bearing unit, the PRN, the kind of rare to negative, that large aquifer. And this is also the area where we do see some of the arsenic. Okay, so iron, manganese, pH. This one looks like a lava blue. So the optimal range for pH is between 6.5 and 8.5. Remember, what we're looking here is not what the water that they're drinking. This is meant to be raw water. And so if you're familiar with southern New Jersey and all this southern portion, not only is it a big sandbox, much of it is the pinelands or the pine barrens, was low pH, naturally occurring low pH in those soils or in the groundwater. So oftentimes a lot of what's outside of the range is not high, but it's low. It's below that 6.5. It's 5.5 and lower. We do even see some pH values of this raw water from in homes in the 3s. So in one case, it's very acidic. Yeah. Okay, VOCs. So we test for 26 different VOCs, volatile organic compounds. And what I'm showing here is the suite of 26 are tested on every one of the homes. So this is where we see at least one exceedance over its specified MCL in these groups. So there might be, a suite of multiple VOCs exceeding, but it's spotty. There's no real natural pattern to this. This has more to do with contamination pollutions and anthropogenic sources rather than anything natural. So what do you do? Test, test, test. We can't emphasize enough. Homeowners have to test. We can have this act, but if you've been in your home for 20 years and you don't plan on leaving that home, there's not going to be any type of intervention where you are handed results or the new homeowner might be handed results. So we do outreach efforts to varying degrees where we do try and make this point that homeowners have to test and have to understand the results. So we suggest testing annually for bacteria and nitrates, and then periodically after that for other chemicals, including the other inorganics. So we make that message clear to the homeowners, but at least annually to test for nitrates and bacteria. We offer them a list of certified labs where they can go to, the homeowners can go to. So it's not a mystery, it's not a brown box where we just tell them to sample. Who do I sample with? So we have a list of our state certified labs so that they can get phone numbers. They can pick and choose who they want. They can shop around for best prices. Okay. Treatment options, point of use, whole house systems. I just have pictures maybe that helps too. So point of use system, this might sit under your cabinet, under your kitchen sink. Reverse osmosis might run you the most of up to $500, although we're seeing them cheaper and cheaper nowadays. So that might be your best point of use. But maybe you have a whole house system. This is an arsenic treatment system with dual tanks, a treatment tank or a worker tank and a backup tank. And so this would have to be treated or fixed out every couple of years, where the safety tank replaces the worker tank and a new safety tank and stuff. So not only does it require testing and maintenance, or testing, but also maintenance by the homeowner. So this isn't a one-time thing. You put these in once and you walk away. You have to keep maintenance on them. So for the radionuclides, so if we were to expand this statewide, you're going to have compounding radionuclide results. So we would want the uranium tested as well. So how do you treat uranium versus radium? Well, simple water softener is enough to test for or to treat for radium. But maybe you need an anti-exchange system, which the media inside the tank is just slightly different to grab the uranium. But the systems themselves in the basement, they look the same. And they work very similar. Okay. So homeowners then ask, what do I do? Can I pay for it? How do I pay for it? So now I know that I've got this issue. Well, there is an assistance program through the state where we offer 10-year zero-interest loans. Very easy to qualify for them, especially if you have results that come from the Private Well Testing Act. So it's not grants in any sense, but it is it's no-interest financing for up to 10 years. We have a few minutes still. Okay. So some
You
of the,
started late, that's our fault.
so some of the public outreach efforts that we've done, and a lot of this is, or I should say a portion of this, not a lot, give credit to what's been done, but some of this has been done in cooperation with our folks, with Stuart and Steve with Superfund grant as well. So a lot of this we've been partners with, and maybe not necessarily directly. So for example, Hopewell Township, they host an annual testing event where homeowners can come out and get bottles, and either sometimes it's free sampling depending on how, I guess, good town finances are. Sometimes it's subsidized, and sometimes it's just an opportunity for homeowners to get the testing kit, and some of the effort is reduced on their end. They can return them to the municipal building, and the municipal building can send them off. Pick up and drop off stations, Montgomery Township and Somerset County has had success with this. East Amwell Township, they send out alerts with their tax bills. So you can do it in their water bill, right? But you can do it with a tax bill. Everybody gets one of those. The town does not miss those. So on your tax bill, maybe it's just a general reminder that you have a private well, or that if you have a private well, you should be testing. World Water Monitoring Day. This is an example. I put this in an event that I'll be participating in on Friday. We bring in about 250 junior high age school kids to an event. I'm just one of the little booths that the kids walk around to. But we give them information, we give them an overview about why testing wells are important, a little handout that they can take home. This is what the test and some links on it so that you can get information. So that's a nice intervention with students. Another intervention that's been done with students, students work great because they're a fixed audience. So 8th grade students, this is work by one of our colleagues at the department, Steve Spade, working with Alexandria Township. Schools went to 8th grade science classes, and they just worked with the teachers to fit into the curriculum. So each of the students were handed a bottle that they could take home, they could fill up with instructions on how to do it right, and then bring that in with $10. And then for $10, each of these tests, each of the water samples were tested for arsenic. The results were returned to the parents confidentially, with Steve also knowing the results so we could summarize them. But individual results are not publicized. So, so then some of the quick results for that would just be, those are the results from that Alexandria school intervention. So a large number of the samples came back as being less than 5, so less than our state standard. But still, a number of them came up pretty high. I mean, one sample as high as 65 micrograms per liter. So 45 in total. So 18% still. Well, they're not in that range of what we're seeing of homes that exceed. So the homeowners then, whether they sold their home or didn't sell their home, and likely if they've got, well, I shouldn't make assumptions like that, but maybe many of these haven't sold their home unless they have young kids in school. Now have an indication, at least in Alexandria, which is one of the arsenic-rich towns, that they have an issue that they would want to treat for. So here's a well-owner arsenic survey that was conducted. Sarah Flanagan, one of our colleagues at Columbia, also under the Superfund program. We funded through CDC's Environmental Public Health Tracking Program, that's what they knew it comes in, and the Superfund Research Program funded what wound up being one of 3 publications, which was great work by Sarah to collect information and not only a single publication, but 3 with different aspects of the survey and surveys with other cooperators in Maine looking at arsenic awareness and arsenic interventions. We looked at 17 towns in that arsenic-rich areas, sent out 2,000 surveys, had 532 of them returned in forms which we thought were analyzable. And those who have tested under the Private Well Testing Act, compared to a cohort that were not have never tested under the Private Well Testing Act. So these 3 bullets are looking at some of the results from the group who have tested, who have been handed test results. They forget or misremember their arsenic test results, in some cases drastically misremember, where they were in the 20s or 30s or so of micrograms per liter, but thought that they were well below the standard. More likely to report not knowing what treatment, if any, they're using, or not reporting better maintenance or monitoring of their treatment systems than those who have maybe not tested in quite some number of years. So just because they're testing doesn't necessarily mean they have all the information that they should. So of all the participants in the survey, 24% reported that they have no treatment. 29% said they use a pitcher or refrigerator filter, which is not filtering out arsenic. And then 11% use bottled water only. Interesting results. New information that we didn't have prior. And then lastly, if I have just a couple minutes, I'll show you. This is, I think, one of our more useful and present outreach efforts. And that's an online interactive website that we've set up, basically with all the maps that you've just seen, but on one line format, so homeowners can go to one dedicated site and have a sense of their own, as we're telling them, test, test, test. Well, sometimes they want to know, before I test, should I test? What are my neighbors' levels, and so on. So they ask questions that we want to, but also we want to let them know what data exists out there. So with this vast database that we have, it's sort of inherent upon us to do something in a public-facing way with it as well. So we set up these maps. The home page that you would get to with that URL will take you here. Shows you a number of different links that we have posted from our DEP websites. And then what you can do is scroll across the top, and I'm going to show you just real quick what each of those do. So you could look at county information. So data summarized by county. Like I said, people still are interested in what's on a larger regional scale. What are the criteria in my county? So you could click on a county, and you could, so for example, this is Monmouth County, and you could scroll down and you can see what percent of each parameter exceeds, and the number of wells that have been tested, certain parameters that you might be interested in. Maybe you want to look at a specific municipality. You can go to your town, and you can click on that town and see the same information. You can also go across and look at by grids. So you can then look at statewide grid. I didn't show a map for that one. But it looks like the county or the municipality. You can just see grids. You can click on any one of the grids and you can pick up all the different parameters. Or you might just be arsenic centric or fecal or gross alpha, or any specific, and you can see the color gradation, which is useful too. So you could just click and get results, or if you use this little button down, this button down here, if you're on a smartphone, these work fine. You can click this little button and it'll go to right where you are, and so you can see on a map the little dot, your location, what grid you're in, and what the groundwater quality might be like. Maybe that's useful for for potential buyers who are driving the neighborhood, perhaps. Or you can put an address. And so this little button here, you can type in an address. You can put in your own address. And I forget whose address this was. This was somebody else. So I borrowed the slides from. So 12 Amwell Road. You could plug it in, zoom to it, and there's the address. And then you could also pick up the results. So if you're interested in, your own home, or your neighbor, or not your neighbors, but you're a relative that you're interested in sort of helping them understand water chemistry or water quality in their area. That's useful. Okay. So some contact information. My information is at the top. I'll be the primary contact, but if there are specific questions to database maintenance and general calls to the Private Well Testing Act or some of our partners at the Department of Health who we work closely with, they can be reached there. So this is for maintenance in questions pertaining specifically to the Private Well Testing Act. Some of those outreach efforts with Columbia, I'll defer everything to Stuart and Steve. But thanks for your time.
Terrific. I see Alan Stern on the line.
Yes.
He's a graduate of this department.
Yes, he is. Yes, Alan is Bureau Chief of our Bureau of Risk Assessment, and a close colleague. Yeah.
Say hi.
Sure will. See.
Do you see, have you looked for if there's any relationship between the pHs, especially the low pHs and lead?
We want to do more with our lead data. And we recognize, and I didn't show you anything with lead, and somewhat intentionally.
Even though I have.
And even though you know. We're still trying to work out some of the nuance with the lead data. How do I want to say it? There are a number of contradictory results with the lead, where there's supposed to be raw water samples. Although the samples can be collected under the rules of the Act, they can be collected at the tap. If there's no treatment in place, if there's no home treatment in place, the water can be collected from the tap. But we need to sort through some of the data and look at where the samples are where they're collected from, taps, storage, the holding tanks and so on. Sometimes they're at a kitchen sink, sometimes at a bathroom sink, sometimes we question some of the flushing rates and stuff. So we're still diving through, trying to sift through lead and what the lead data means. But once we do, I think it's really important to connect it back to the pH and is that relationship there. But that's down the road. Yes?
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really wonderful to learn all what you are doing. I wanted to ask about the impact that you think you are having on other states, because this seems really impressive. And are there other states interested in learning on what you are doing? And especially I was thinking, Pennsylvania, clearly, is right because it is a border that the program is.
I usually like to start off by bragging that we do have the largest private well testing act in the country and most comprehensive, although Oregon and Rhode Island also have statewide programs. Rhode Island looks to be somewhat very comprehensive as well. I think ours does have a longer history than Rhode Island. And Oregon is just for coliform and nitrates and real estate transactions. Rhode Island's also real estate transactions. My guess is that there are other programs, there are other counties in New Jersey that even prior to the Private Well Testing Act becoming enacted had rules and regulations for testing. But we have had discussions with other states about trying, not necessarily expanding, but what have we learned? How would, what were some of the, especially some of the political hurdles that go into passing legislation that requires testing? That's tough.
We've learned about some of that in Maine with our
and I've been in some of those conversations with colleagues from Maine. And, I know the demographics are different, and I know that there are differences.
The governor is different.
Well, I don't know.
I was going to say,
That's right.
Yes.
I agree, it's a very impressive program. One question I have is, has the municipal water supply system, has that been expanding over in New Jersey, or has that been the same for the past 50 years?
Well, that's a good question. So are more and more folks moving to public water?
This would create pressure to do that, this sort of thing.
Yeah, it sure would, especially in some of these areas where we know there are hotspots exist.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I can give you a straight answer whether that has been increasing. My sense, somebody from the public water supply side of things might disagree, but my sense is that it's status quo at the moment.
But it might be another direction for information.
It would be, and it's something that I'll take that away. I think that's something to